the market where the train passes through. A Thailand Through Eyes Sleep story. Chapter 1. The video I thought was fake. Before I came to Thailand, I believed the videos were fake. Not completely fake, perhaps, but exaggerated, edited, carefully staged for tourists. The internet is full of impossible things after all. Tiny moments transformed into spectacles. Ordinary events turned into legends. And among those legends was one particular video that appeared on my screen again and again. A train, a market, and a scene that seemed impossible. The video always began the same way. Rows of colorful umbrellas stretched over narrow railway tracks. Vendors sold mangoes, coconuts, seafood, vegetables, and sweets. Customers wandered casually through the crowded pathway. Everything appeared normal. Then a horn sounded. A train emerged from the distance. The umbrellas folded backward, tables shifted. Customers stepped aside. And somehow, impossibly, a full-size train rolled directly through the center of the market. Not beside it, not behind it, through it. The train passed so closely to baskets of fruit that it seemed impossible. Nothing was struck. Then, just seconds later, the market returned to normal. Umbrellas unfolded. Goods returned to their original positions. Customers resumed shopping. Life continued. As though a train passing through the market was no more unusual than a breeze passing through an open window. I watched the video several times, then several dozen times. Each viewing left me with more questions. Surely nobody would build a market on active railway tracks. Surely railway authorities would not allow it. Surely someone had decided long ago that such a thing was unsafe. Yet the videos kept appearing. Different angles, different seasons, different years. Always the same scene. Always the same calmness. And perhaps that was the part I found hardest to believe. Not the train. The people. Nobody seemed alarmed. Nobody rushed. Nobody shouted. They simply moved. Smoothly. Naturally. As though they had rehearsed it 1,000 times. Years later, that curiosity finally brought me to Thailand. My name is Oliver Bennett. I am a travel writer from England. For nearly 10 years, I had traveled across different countries collecting stories. Not famous landmarks. Not luxury resorts. Stories. The small human stories hidden behind places. The kinds of stories tourists often miss because they are too busy taking photographs. When I planned my journey through Thailand, I made a list of places I wanted to see. Ancient temples, floating markets, mountain villages, national parks, small fishing communities, and near the top of that list was the railway market. Not because it was famous, but because I wanted to understand how something so strange could feel so normal. So one human morning before sunrise, I found myself sitting in a minibus leaving Bangkok. Most of the city was still asleep. Streetlights glowed softly against wet pavement. Rain had fallen during the night. Tiny droplets clung to the windows. The air conditioning hummed quietly. Several passengers slept with their heads resting against their seat. Others stared silently out the windows. The driver played gentle Thai music at a low volume. Outside, the city gradually faded away. Tall buildings became shorter. Traffic became lighter. Concrete gave way to greenery. The horizon widened. As dawn slowly approached, the landscape transformed. Rice fields stretched across the countryside. Palm trees swayed in the distance. Narrow canals reflected the pale colors of the awakening sky. A light mist floated above the water. The entire world seemed wrapped in softness. The farther we traveled from Bangkok, the slower everything felt. Not lazy, not empty, simply unhurried. The kind of pace that allows people to notice things. Birdsong, wind moving through leaves, the scent of rain lingering in the air. I pressed my forehead gently against the cool glass. Outside, small villages passed by. Wooden houses stood beside canals. Motorcycles moved quietly along narrow roads. Monks in orange robes walked peacefully through the morning light. Every scene felt calm, almost dreamlike. I could understand why so many travelers spoke about Thailand differently after visiting. There was a gentleness here, a rhythm, a way of moving through life that seemed difficult to describe but easy to feel. Several hours later, the minibus entered a small town. The driver announced our destination. People gathered their bags. The doors opened. Warm air rushed inside. Immediately, I could smell food. Fresh food, real food, not restaurant food prepared for tourists. Food prepared for everyday life. Grilled pork, garlic, fresh herbs, sweet coconut, ripe fruit. The aromas drifted through the morning air like invisible invitations. I stepped onto the street. The town was already awake. Bicycles moved slowly along the roads. Shopkeepers swept sidewalks. Children walked beside their parents. The sounds were gentle, conversation, laughter, the occasional bark of a dog. Nothing felt hurried. Nothing felt staged. Following signs and directions I had saved on my phone, I began walking toward the market. At first, I wasn't entirely sure I was in the right place. The streets seemed ordinary, local, authentic, not the sort of place designed around tourism. Then I noticed something unusual. Railway tracks, running directly through the center of the town. I followed them. Soon the tracks led me toward a bustling market. And there it was, the place I had seen online so many times. Except it looked completely different in real life. The videos never captured the atmosphere, the smells, the sounds, the warmth, the humanity. Stalls lined both sides of the railway. Bright vegetables created splashes of green, orange, and red. Fish rested on beds of ice. Fresh flowers hung from baskets. Coconuts were stacked into neat pyramids. People moved comfortably through the narrow spaces, buying breakfast, greeting neighbors, starting another ordinary day. I stood quietly for several moments, observing, listening, trying to understand what I was seeing, because despite all the videos I had watched, the reality felt somehow more unbelievable. The tracks weren't abandoned. They weren't decorative. They were fully integrated into the market itself. Some vendors displayed goods directly beside the rails. Others positioned the baskets only inches away. A few even had awnings extending over the tracks. It seemed impossible, yet everyone behaved as though it were perfectly normal. An elderly man arranged bananas. A woman sold fresh seafood. Children carried bags for their parents. Nobody paid special attention to the tracks. Nobody stared. Nobody pointed. For them, this wasn't a famous attraction. It was simply home. I wandered deeper into the market. The railway stretched ahead like a narrow silver path disappearing into the crowd. Occasionally, tourists stopped to take photographs, but even they seemed quieter than usual. Perhaps the market encouraged it. Perhaps there was something about the atmosphere that made loud behavior feel out of place. I paused beside a stall selling coconuts. The woman running it appeared to be in her 70s. Her face carried the kind of smile that only comes from decades of greeting strangers. Not forced, not practiced, natural. She noticed me studying the railway and smiled. First time? Her English was simple but clear. I laughed. Is it that obvious? She nodded. Very obvious. I looked around. What gave me away? You keep checking the tracks. I laughed again. She wasn't wrong. I had probably glanced at them 20 times in the last minute. The woman pointed toward a small stool beside her stall. Sit. I hesitated. She smiled again. Sit. Relax. So I sat. She handed me a fresh coconut. I thanked her. The coconut water was cool and sweet, perfect against the growing warmth of the morning. For a few minutes, we watched the market together. People came and went. Customers chatted. Motorcycles occasionally crossed nearby streets. Life flowed around us, comfortable, steady. Then I asked the question I had carried for years. Does the train really come through here? The woman looked at me, then laughed. A soft laugh filled with amusement. Not mockery, just amusement. Yes. Every day? Yes. I shook my head. I still don't believe it. That made her laugh even harder. Many nearby vendors smiled. Apparently they had heard this conversation before. Many times. The woman pointed down the tracks. You wait. I am waiting. You will believe. I smiled. Perhaps I would. But at that moment, a part of me still expected some hidden explanation. A trick. A detail I had missed. something that would make everything logical. The morning continued. The sun climbed higher. The market grew busier. More customers arrived. More conversations filled the air. I found myself relaxing, enjoying the atmosphere. For a while, I almost forgot about the train entirely. Then something changed. Not dramatically, not suddenly, subtly. Like the first sign of rain before a storm. Far down the tracks, somewhere beyond the buildings, a faint sound echoed through the distance. A horn, very soft, almost hidden beneath the noise of the market. The elderly coconut seller glanced up immediately. Not surprised, simply aware. Several other vendors did the same. Nobody panicked, nobody rushed. But there was movement now. Purposeful movement. The kind of movement people make when responding to something familiar. The woman beside me smiled. Then she looked directly at me. "You hear that?" I nodded. Another horn sounded, slightly closer. The market continued operating. Yet somehow the atmosphere had shifted, like an orchestra preparing for a performance. Everyone knew their role. Everyone knew exactly what would happen next. Everyone except me. I looked down the railway tracks, far in the distance, past rows of umbrellas, past baskets of fruit, past crowds of shoppers. Something was coming. And for the first time that morning, I realized the videos had never truly captured what made this place remarkable. It wasn't the train. It wasn't the market. It was the people. Because whatever happened next, they weren't afraid of it. They had learned how to live alongside it. And as the distant horn echoed once more through the warm Thai morning, I leaned forward on my stool and watched the tracks carefully. The train was coming, and I was finally about to discover whether the impossible was real. Chapter 2. When the market opened like a flower, the horn sounded again, closer this time, longer, clearer. The moment it echoed through the market, something remarkable happened. Not chaos, not panic, not even urgency. Instead, the entire market seemed to exhale, like a living thing, like a flower responding to sunlight. The elderly coconut seller beside me stood up calmly. "Watch carefully," she said. Around us, vendors began moving, not running, moving. Each person performing a task they had performed hundreds, perhaps thousands of times before. A woman selling vegetables reached above her head and released a latch. Her awning folded backward in one smooth motion. Across the tracks, a seafood vendor pulled a table several inches away from the rails. Nearby, a fruit seller lifted baskets onto a shelf attached to his stall. Every action appeared effortless, practiced, natural. The transformation spread down the railway like a wave, one stall after another, one awning after another, one vendor after another. Within seconds, the market itself seemed to reshape. I stared in disbelief, not because people were moving, but because they were moving together. Nobody shouted instructions. Nobody gave orders. Nobody appeared confused. There was no leader directing the process. The community simply knew. Each person understood their role. Each person trusted everyone else to do theirs. The distant horn sounded once more, this time much closer. Tourists gathered cameras. Phones appeared everywhere. People positioned themselves along safe areas beside the tracks. I remained on the stool, still trying to process what I was witnessing. The coconut seller laughed. "You still think it is fake?" I shook my head. "No. Good." Another smile. Then she folded part of her stall's shade structure with surprising speed. At her age, I had expected slow movements. Instead, she worked with the confidence of someone performing a familiar morning ritual, like making tea, like opening a door, like watering plants. The train, apparently, belonged in the same category. I looked down the railway and finally saw it, a bright yellow front emerging from the distance. At first, it seemed small, almost harmless. Then it continued approaching, steadily, slowly, growing larger. The tracks vibrated gently beneath my feet. The horn echoed again, and suddenly the reality of the situation struck me. That was a real train. Not a tourist train, not a decorative train, not a museum train, a working train carrying passengers, traveling through the center of a crowded market. The train rolled closer, closer, closer. The distance between train and market seemed impossibly small, yet nobody appeared worried. Children stood calmly beside their parents. Vendors continued adjusting baskets. Customers stepped aside with relaxed expressions. The atmosphere felt almost peaceful. The train entered the market. I held my breath. The metal body passed only inches from stalls. Inches, not meters, not feet, inches. The gap was so narrow that I could see tiny details on the side of the train, scratches in the paint, reflections in the windows, passengers looking outward with amused smiles. Some waved. Tourists waved back. The train continued moving, slowly, patiently, respectfully. It felt less like transportation and more like a guest being welcomed into a neighborhood. No sudden movements, no aggressive noise, no rushing, just trust, pure trust. For a moment, I forgot to take photographs, forgot to record video, forgot everything except what I was seeing. Because the most extraordinary thing was not the train itself. The extraordinary thing was how ordinary it felt to everyone else. The train continued passing, carriage after carriage, window after window. Then, finally, the last carriage disappeared down the tracks. The market paused for perhaps 2 seconds. Then, everything reversed. The awnings unfolded. Tables moved back. Baskets returned. Customers resumed shopping. Within less than a minute, the railway had transformed back into a marketplace. The entire event felt almost magical, like watching a stage change during a theater performance. Yet nothing about it was artificial. It was real, completely real. The coconut seller sat back down, as though nothing unusual had happened. "Now you believe?" I laughed. "Now I believe." She nodded. "Good." I looked around the market. Life had already returned to normal. People were buying vegetables, selecting fish, choosing fruit. The train was gone. Only the rails remained. If I had arrived a few minutes later, I would never have guessed what had just occurred. The simplicity of that thought amazed me. For locals, the train was not the story. The market was, the community was, the train simply passed through. I turned toward the woman. "What is your name?" "Nuan." "Auntie Nuan?" She smiled. "Everybody calls me that." I introduced myself. "Oliver, from England?" I blinked. "How did you know?" She laughed. "The accent." "Fair enough." We sat together watching the market. A gentle breeze moved through the open space left by the folded awnings. The smell of fresh mangoes drifted nearby. Somewhere, oil crackled from a food stall preparing breakfast. Life continued, comfortable, steady, unhurried. After a few moments, I asked another question. "How long have you worked here?" Auntie Nuan thought carefully, then laughed. "Almost my whole life." "Really?" She nodded. "My mother sold coconuts here." She pointed down the railway. "My grandmother too." That surprised me. 3 generations? Yes. I looked around again. The market suddenly felt older, deeper. The videos online had reduced it to a curiosity, a spectacle, something unusual to watch for 30 seconds. But standing here, speaking with Auntie Nuan, I began seeing something entirely different. This wasn't a tourist attraction that happened to have vendors. It was a community that happened to have a train. The distinction mattered. "Did your grandmother also move the awnings for trains?" I asked. Auntie Nuan laughed. "Of course." "And your mother?" "Of course." "And you?" "Every day." I smiled. The answer felt obvious now. She pointed toward the rails. "When you grow up here, it is normal." I considered that normal such a simple word, yet it explained so much. To me, the railway market seemed extraordinary because I had never experienced anything like it. To Auntie Nuan, it was simply life, the same way people elsewhere become accustomed to snow, or mountains, or oceans. People adapt to whatever surrounds them, and eventually the unusual becomes ordinary. A young boy approached the stall carrying a small basket. Auntie Nuan greeted him warmly. The boy smiled and handed her something wrapped in paper. She opened it. Inside was a piece of cake. She immediately cut it in half, offering one piece to me. I tried to refuse. She insisted, so I accepted. The cake was sweet and soft, simple, delicious. The boy sat nearby, chatting with Auntie Nuan, completely unconcerned about the fact that a train had just passed through the market. To him, that event was probably less interesting than the cake. That realization made me smile. Perhaps true understanding always begins this way, not by focusing on what seems extraordinary, but by noticing what feels ordinary to the people who live it. As the morning continued, I observed the market more carefully. The relationships, the greetings, the familiarity. Vendors borrowed tools from one another. Customers stopped to chat. People shared food, shared news, shared laughter. The train might attract visitors, but these connections sustained the market. Without them, the place would simply be rails and stalls. With them, it became a community. Around midday, the crowds began thinning slightly. The sun climbed higher overhead. Heat shimmered softly above the tracks. I bought another coconut from Auntie Nuan. This time, she refused payment. Welcome gift. I protested. She refused. I laughed. She won, as she often seemed to. We sat quietly for a while, listening to the gentle sounds of the market. Then I asked something that had been lingering in my mind. Were you ever afraid of the trains when you were a child? Auntie Nuan looked down the tracks, thought for a moment, then shook her head. No, never. No. She smiled softly, because the train was always part of the family. Part of the family. The phrase stayed with me. Not an interruption, not an obstacle, not an enemy. Part of the family. I looked once more at the railway running through the market, at the vendors, the customers, the children, the folded awnings, the baskets of fruit, and I realized my original misunderstanding. I had come expecting to see how people survived something unusual. Instead, I was beginning to learn how people embraced it, and those were two very different stories. The afternoon sunlight warmed the rails. The market continued breathing around us, and somewhere beyond the town, the train was already preparing to return. Chapter 3. The woman who grew up beside the rails. The afternoon heat settled gently over the market. Not the harsh heat I was used to imagining when I thought about tropical countries. This was softer somehow, a warm blanket rather than a burning furnace. The kind of heat that slowed people down just enough to notice the world around them. Shadows stretched beneath the awnings. Fans rotated lazily above food stalls. Some vendors sat quietly eating lunch. Others chatted with neighbors. The railway tracks gleamed beneath the sunlight, silent for now, waiting. I remained beside Auntie Nuan's coconut stall. Originally, I had planned to stay only an hour, perhaps 2. Now half the day had disappeared without me noticing. The market had a strange effect on time. Nothing seemed rushed. Nothing demanded attention. Life simply unfolded. Slowly, naturally, comfortably. Auntie Nuan was peeling coconuts with remarkable skill. Her hands moved confidently, one smooth motion after another. Decades of experience visible in every cut. I watched for several minutes before asking another question. So you've lived here your whole life? She nodded. My whole life. Never moved away? She smiled. For what? The answer made me laugh. It was such a simple response, yet it contained an entire philosophy. Why leave if you already have everything you need? I looked around. The market, the town, the people who greeted her every few minutes. Perhaps she had a point. Auntie Nuan noticed me observing the surroundings. You know, she said, when I was little, I thought every town had trains and markets together. Really? She nodded. Why wouldn't I? I smiled. Children often assume their world is everyone's world. Only later do they discover how different life can be elsewhere. Auntie Nuan continued peeling coconuts. When I was young, I didn't understand why visitors were surprised. And now, she laughed. Now I understand. A customer approached, purchased several coconuts, exchanged friendly conversation, then disappeared into the crowd. The interaction felt less like business and more like visiting a friend. That happened repeatedly throughout the day. Customers weren't merely customers. Many seemed to be neighbors, family friends, people who had known one another for years, perhaps decades. The market functioned as something larger than commerce. It was a social space, a meeting place, a living room for the community. Eventually, I asked the question that had been growing in my mind. What was it like growing up here? Auntie Nuan paused, then smiled. The kind of smile people wear when opening an old memory. Different. She glanced down the railway. Very different. I settled back onto the stool, ready to listen. The market continued humming around us, but somehow everything else faded into the background. I remember waking up before sunrise, she began. My mother always woke early. The memory seemed vivid, almost visible, before tourists came, before social media, before everyone had phones. She laughed softly. Life was quieter then. I imagined the scene, a younger version of this market. Fewer visitors, fewer cameras, more local faces, more familiar routines. My mother sold coconuts here too, Auntie Nuan continued, and my grandmother before her. She pointed toward the tracks. Same place. The exact same place? Almost. That surprised me. 3 generations occupying nearly the same spot. In many parts of the world, entire neighborhoods change within a decade. Here, a family's connection to the market stretched across generations. When I was little, she said, I helped carry coconuts. You worked as a child? She laughed. Not work. She thought carefully. Helping. The distinction seemed important. Helping family, helping community, participating in daily life. Not employment. Belonging. I nodded. She continued. Every morning I walked along the tracks. No fear? No fear. The answer came instantly, as though the question itself was strange. The railway was always there. She pointed toward the rails again, like a road. I consider that. To an outsider, railway tracks symbolized danger. To Auntie Nuan, they symbolized familiarity. The difference lay entirely in perspective. Children played nearby. Families lived beside them. Life adapted. And eventually, the tracks became part of the landscape. No more remarkable than a sidewalk, a bicycle lane, or a river. A breeze drifted through the market, carrying scents of grilled seafood and fresh herbs. The afternoon felt peaceful, almost sleepy, perfect for storytelling. What about the trains? I asked. Were they always the same? Auntie Nuan smiled. No, she shook her head. Everything changes. The market around us seemed to agree. People change. Buildings change. Technology changes. Yet somehow the spirit remains. She explained how trains had looked different when she was young. Different colors, different sounds, different schedules. But the relationship between market and railway remained. Generation after generation. The train arrived, the market adjusted. The train left, life continued. Simple, predictable, comforting. A young vendor from a nearby stall overheard part of our conversation. He smiled. Auntie tells good stories. Auntie Nuan laughed. Old people always tell stories. The young man grinned. That's because old people remember things. The exchange felt warm, playful, respectful. Another small glimpse into the community around us. I asked the young vendor if he had grown up here too. He nodded. My family sells fruit. How long? He shrugged. Longer than me. Everyone laughed. Fair answer. The market seemed full of families whose roots stretched deeply into the town. Generations building lives together, supporting one another, sharing space, sharing history, sharing stories. Eventually, the young vendor returned to work. Auntie Nuan watched him go. His grandfather sold fruit. I smiled. Of course he did. She laughed. Of course. The answer felt inevitable now. The market wasn't simply a collection of stalls. It was a network of families, lives intertwined across decades. Perhaps that explained the calmness I had witnessed when the train arrived. Trust. People trusted one another because they knew one another, often for many years, sometimes for entire lifetimes. Auntie Nuan glanced toward the railway, then toward me. You know what tourists usually ask? What? How do we move everything so fast? I laughed. I was wondering that too. She smiled. They asked the wrong question. That surprised me. What is the right question? Auntie Nuan thought for a moment, then answered, How did we learn to trust each other? I sat quietly, The response carried unexpected weight, because she was right. Anyone could learn how to fold an awning. Anyone could move a table. The remarkable part wasn't the movement. It was the coordination, the confidence, the shared understanding, trust. Without trust, the system would collapse. Without trust, every train would create anxiety. Without trust, the market would never function. I began seeing the railway market differently. Not as a strange attraction, not as an engineering curiosity, but as a lesson in cooperation. Thousands of small actions performed together, over and over, year after year, generation after generation. A distant horn echoed faintly through the afternoon air. The next train, still far away, but approaching, Auntie Nuan smiled. Time for another show. Yet even as she said it, I realized something important. For me, it was still a show. For her, it was simply Tuesday. The difference mattered. As vendors casually prepared once more, I found myself paying less attention to the train and more attention to the people. The smiles, the conversations, the effortless teamwork, the quiet confidence. And I began understanding something that many visitors probably missed. The railway market is famous because a train passes through it, but it survives because a community does. The train merely reveals what was already there: trust, adaptation, patience, connection, the values that transform unusual circumstances into ordinary life. The distant horn sounded again, closer now. The market began its familiar transformation. Awnings folded, tables shifted, people stepped aside, calm, comfortable, certain. And as I watched the market open once more like a flower welcoming the train, I realized my understanding of Thailand was changing, slowly, gently, like the market itself. Not through grand discoveries, but through small moments, small conversations, small truths, the kind that stay with you long after the journey ends. Chapter 4. The train driver's view. The second train of the afternoon passed through the market with the same quiet confidence as the first. Awnings folded, tables moved, customers stepped aside. The train rolled forward. Then everything returned to normal. The entire process took only a few minutes. Yet now, after spending most of the day in the market, I found myself paying attention to different details. Earlier, I had watched the train. Now I watched the people. A tourist attraction would have created excitement. This created rhythm. The train was not interrupting the market. It was part of the market, like a bell marking the hours, like the changing tide near a fishing village, like sunrise and sunset, an event so familiar that life naturally organized itself around it. When the train disappeared into the distance, Auntie Nuan stretched her shoulders and smiled. "You see? I do. Different from the videos?" I laughed. Very different. The videos showed what happened. They did not explain why it felt so peaceful. She nodded. People always see the train, and not the people? Exactly. For a moment, we sat quietly together. The afternoon sunlight reflected softly from the rails. The market hummed with life once more. Somewhere nearby, a radio played an old Thai song. Children laughed. A vendor called out prices. The scent of grilled squid drifted through the warm air. Everything felt wonderfully ordinary. Then Auntie Nuan pointed toward a small station building farther down the tracks. "You should talk to the driver." "The driver?" She nodded. "He sometimes stops there after arriving." "You know him?" Auntie Nuan laughed loudly. "Everyone knows everyone." Of course they did. By now, that answer no longer surprised me. A few minutes later, curiosity led me down the tracks. The station was modest, nothing grand, nothing modern. Just a practical building serving a practical purpose. A handful of passengers waited quietly. Others sat beneath shaded areas, escaping the afternoon sun. The atmosphere felt relaxed, unhurried. I found a bench and sat down, watching, listening. The market continued behind me. The railway stretched ahead. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then I noticed a man walking toward the station carrying a small bag. He appeared to be in his late 50s. His uniform immediately caught my attention. Train crew. Perhaps the driver. Perhaps someone else. The station worker greeted him warmly. They exchanged a few words, laughed, then continued chatting. The familiarity reminded me of Auntie Nuan. This town seemed woven together through relationships. Eventually, I approached, introduced myself, explained that I was a travel writer. The man smiled. My name is Somchai. His English was careful but confident. I asked if he worked on the train. He nodded. Driver. I almost laughed at my good fortune. After spending the entire day watching trains pass through the market, I was now speaking with one of the people responsible for guiding them. We sat beneath the shade together. A gentle breeze moved through the station. For a while, we simply talked about Thailand, about England, about the weather, about travel. The conversation felt natural, no rush, no pressure. Eventually, I asked the question that had been waiting in my mind all day. What is it like driving through the market? Somchai smiled immediately. Apparently, he had heard this question before, many times. It is slow. I laughed. I noticed. He nodded, very slow. Then he became thoughtful. You know, people think the difficult part is driving. It isn't? No. He shook his head. The difficult part is trust. The same word again. Trust. I remembered Auntie Nuan saying exactly the same thing. That could not be a coincidence. What do you mean? I asked. Somchai looked toward the market. The vendors trust me. He pointed toward the tracks. And I trust them. Simple, direct, powerful. He continued. If I don't trust them, I worry. If they don't trust me, they worry. I nodded. That made perfect sense. How long have you driven this route? More than 20 years. 20 years. Thousands of journeys, thousands of arrivals, thousands of departures. Enough time for an entire career. Enough time to become part of the community. Do you know many of the vendors? Somchai laughed. Most of them. Again, the answer felt obvious. How could he not? If the same train passed through the same market day after day, year after year, relationships would naturally form. The train driver wasn't an outsider. He was part of the story. Part of the community, part of the rhythm. A woman from the station cafe approached carrying iced coffee. Without asking, she handed one to Somchai, then another to me. I reached for my wallet. She waved her hand dismissively. No need. Then she smiled and returned inside. I looked at Somchai. He laughed. Welcome to Thailand. I smiled. I had heard variations of that phrase many times during my travels, yet each time it carried genuine warmth, not marketing, not performance, hospitality, the kind that appears naturally. We sipped coffee. The ice clinked softly inside the plastic cups. The afternoon heat seemed gentler now. I looked toward the market again. People continued shopping, talking, living. The railway divided the market physically, yet somehow united it socially. A strange paradox, one that fascinated me. Eventually, I asked another question. Were there ever problems? Somchai considered carefully, then nodded. Sometimes. His honesty surprised me. Nothing is perfect. That answer felt refreshing. Too often, travel stories try to turn places into fairy tales. Real communities are more interesting than fairy tales because they contain reality, patience, compromise, adaptation. Somchai explained that over the years, everyone had learned together. Drivers, vendors, residents, railway staff, tourists, each group adjusting, improving, understanding. The system worked not because it was perfect, but because people cared enough to make it work. I thought about that for several moments. Many visitors probably arrived expecting a spectacle, something unbelievable, something dangerous, something chaotic. Instead, what existed here was cooperation. Quiet cooperation, the kind that rarely goes viral online, the kind that doesn't fit neatly into a 30-second video. Yet it was the most remarkable part of all. A train horn echoed somewhere in the distance. Not close, just a faint reminder that another journey was underway. Somchai listened, then smiled. Sounds strange to you? A little. He nodded. To me, it sounds like home. The words settled gently between us. Home. I looked down the tracks. The rails shimmered beneath the afternoon sunlight. The market beyond them glowed with color and movement. Children ran between stalls. Vendors chatted. Customers carried bags filled with fresh produce. Life unfolded naturally, comfortably, peacefully. And for the first time since arriving, I understood something important. The railway market was never about the train. Not really. The train simply gave outsiders a reason to look. The true story was everything surrounding it. The families, the friendships, the trust. The generations of people who had learned to share space with something most of the world considered impossible. As the afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, Somchai finished his coffee and stood. Another train soon. Back through the market? He smiled. Of course. I laughed. Of course. Where else would it go? Before leaving, I thanked him for his time. Then I asked one final question. The question that had quietly followed me throughout the day. What do you think visitors misunderstand most about this place? Somchai thought carefully, long enough that I wondered if he might not answer. Finally, he smiled. They think the market survives despite the train. He looked toward the rails, then toward the town beyond them. But the truth is, he paused. The market and the train grew up together. With that, he nodded politely and walked away, leaving me alone with the fading sunlight. And a thought I could not stop replaying in my mind. The market and the train grew up together, not opponents, not obstacles, partners. A relationship built slowly across generations. The kind of relationship that can only emerge through time. As evening shadows began stretching across the tracks, I found myself walking back toward Auntie Nuan's stall. The market was preparing for another train, another graceful transformation, another reminder that some of the world's most extraordinary places are extraordinary precisely because the people living there no longer see them that way. And somehow, that made the railway market even more beautiful. Chapter 5. After the last train, by the time I returned to Auntie Nuan's stall, the afternoon was slowly surrendering to evening. The sunlight had changed. The bright white heat of midday was gone. In its place came a softer golden glow, the kind of light that makes everything appear gentler, kinder. The market looked different now, not because anything had changed, but because evening has a way of revealing details that daylight often hides. The colors seemed warmer, the shadows longer, the atmosphere calmer. Even the railway tracks appeared softer as they reflected the amber light of the descending sun. Auntie Nuan was serving a customer when I arrived. She smiled when she saw me. You found the driver. I did. She laughed. What did he tell you? I sat on the familiar stool. That the train and the market grew up together. Auntie Nuan's smile widened. Very wise. Everyone here seems wise. That made her laugh loudly. The kind of laugh that immediately attracted smiles from nearby vendors. No, she said, we are just old. I wasn't convinced. There was a quiet wisdom here, the sort that developed slowly through years of ordinary living, not through books, not through lectures, but through experience, the wisdom of people who understand that communities survive because people cooperate. The wisdom of people who know that flexibility is often stronger than resistance. The wisdom of people who have learned to adapt without losing themselves. As the evening continued, I noticed subtle changes throughout the market. Some stalls began reducing their displays. Others packed away extra supplies. The crowds slowly thinned. Tourists became fewer. Local shoppers became more visible. Workers stopped by on their way home. Families purchased ingredients for dinner. The market felt less like an attraction now and more like what it truly was. A neighborhood, a living part of daily life. Auntie Nuan handed me another coconut. This time, I didn't even attempt to pay. She would have refused anyway. We sat together watching the market. The rails stretched ahead like silver ribbons through the heart of the town. I thought about the videos I had watched years earlier. Millions of people had seen those clips. Millions had been amazed. Millions had probably shared them with friends. Look at this crazy market in Thailand. Can you believe this? How is this even possible? Yet, very few videos showed moments like this. The quiet moments. The human moments. The moments that actually explained why the market existed. The internet loved the train, but the train was only a small part of the story. The real story sat beside me peeling coconuts. The real story sold fruit, prepared seafood, shared meals, raised children, remembered grandparents. The real story was the community itself. A distant horn echoed across the town, the final train of the day. Several vendors glanced up. The reaction was familiar now, comfortable, predictable, no surprises, no urgency, only routine. Auntie Nuan stood. Last one. I smiled. The words felt strangely meaningful. All day, trains had come and gone. Each arrival seemed less extraordinary than the one before. Not because the train had become less remarkable, but because I had begun understanding the larger picture. The market transformed once again. Awnings folded, tables shifted, baskets moved. Everything happened with the same effortless coordination I had witnessed earlier. The same trust, the same confidence, the same calm. A flower opening, a flower closing, a rhythm perfected through countless repetitions. The horn sounded again, closer. The rails vibrated softly. Then the train appeared. Golden evening sunlight reflected from its windows. Passengers looked out. Some smiled, some waved. Others seemed lost in thought as they traveled toward home. The train moved slowly through the center of the market. The final journey of the day. And for a moment, everything felt almost cinematic. Not dramatic, not exciting, peaceful. The kind of scene that stays with you long after it ends. The train continued forward, carriage after carriage, window after window. Then, gradually, it disappeared into the distance. The horn faded. The vibration vanished. Silence returned. And once more, the market unfolded around the railway. Only this time, something felt different. The day was ending. The energy was changing. Vendors began packing more seriously now. Boxes appeared. Plastic containers were stacked. Unsold produce was organized carefully. The market was preparing to sleep. Auntie Nuan sat beside me again. Together, we watched the transformation. Not the transformation caused by the train. The transformation caused by evening. Children helped their parents carry supplies. Neighbors exchanged goodbyes. Friends paused for final conversations. Some vendors shared food. Others shared drinks. Laughter drifted through the cooling air. The community was slowly gathering itself for the night. I noticed two elderly men sitting beside the tracks drinking tea. Neither seemed interested in tourists. Neither seemed interested in trains. They simply sat together talking. Perhaps they had been doing exactly that for years, perhaps decades. The thought made me smile, because it reminded me of something important. Extraordinary places are still ordinary homes. Visitors see excitement. Residents see life. Both perspectives are true, but only one tells the complete story. The sky slowly shifted from gold to orange, then from orange to purple. Lights began appearing throughout the market. Warm yellow bulbs glowed beneath awnings. Shop signs illuminated. Motorcycles switched on headlights. The town seemed to soften beneath the approaching night. Auntie Nuan finished packing the final coconuts. Her movements were slower now, not from age, from the satisfaction of a completed day. I helped carry a small box. She laughed. Careful, I can manage. We will see. The box wasn't heavy, but her amusement suggested she enjoyed teasing visitors. When everything was finally packed, she sat once more. The market had become noticeably quieter. Many stalls were already closed. The railway looked different without crowds, more visible, more open, almost lonely, yet peaceful, very peaceful. For a while, neither of us spoke. We simply listened, the distant sounds of the town, birds settling for the night, motorcycles passing occasionally, conversations fading into the evening. Eventually, I broke the silence. When I first saw the videos, I thought the market was impossible. Auntie Nuan smiled. And now, I looked down the tracks. The rails stretched into the darkness, passing through the heart of the community, connecting people, connecting generations, connecting stories. It makes perfect sense. She nodded, as though that was exactly the answer she expected. Perhaps it was. A warm breeze moved through the market. The air carried hints of seafood, spices, and rain lingering somewhere far away. Night was arriving. Slowly, gently, I thought about everything I had learned during the day. Not facts, not statistics, not history. something deeper. I had arrived expecting to discover how a train passed through a market. Instead, I discovered how people build lives around one another, how communities adapt, how trust grows, how ordinary people solve unusual problems simply by working together. The railway market wasn't remarkable because it defied logic. It was remarkable because it demonstrated a different kind of logic, human logic, community logic, the logic of relationships, a logic often forgotten in modern life. The tracks glowed faintly beneath nearby lights. No trains would come now. The day was finished. The market was resting. And somehow the silence felt earned, like the final page of a favorite book. Auntie Nuan stood. Time to go home. I stood as well. Thank you, she smiled. Not the smile of a vendor thanking a customer. The smile of someone saying goodbye to a guest. You come back. I will. And I meant it. We exchanged one final wave. Then she disappeared into the evening, walking slowly down a narrow street beyond the market, returning home. Just as she had done countless times before, I remained beside the tracks for a few more minutes. Alone now, watching the town settle into night, the famous railway market was quiet. No crowds, no cameras, no excitement, just rails, shadows, warm lights, and the gentle sounds of ordinary life continuing around them. The scene felt strangely beautiful, because without the train, without the spectacle, without the attention, the true heart of the place became visible. A community, nothing more, nothing less. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. Before coming to Thailand, I thought the railway market was famous because a train passed through it. Now I understood the truth. The train was only the reason people looked. The community was the reason they remembered. The evening deepened. The last colors disappeared from the sky. The railway faded into darkness. And somewhere far beyond the town, carrying passengers through the tropical night, a distant train horn echoed one final time. Soft, familiar, almost comforting, like the voice of an old friend saying goodnight. And beneath the warm evening sky of Thailand, the market slept peacefully beside the tracks, waiting patiently for tomorrow, waiting for sunrise, waiting for the next train, and the next story. The end. Thailand still holds countless stories waiting to be discovered. If you would like to continue this journey together, I hope to see you again in the next story from Thailand Through Eyes. And if there is somewhere in Thailand you wish to visit through story, leave your suggestion below. Perhaps our next journey will begin there.